10 stories, 1 forest. If you made it this far, you're already thinking about the things that wait in places like Coconino. Before you close this video and try to forget what you just heard, do me a favor. Hit subscribe. Not for me. For yourself. Because next week, we're going somewhere darker. And you'll want to know where before you accidentally end up there. Verified souls. We document what the forests remember. I've been a wilderness ranger for 6 years now, but my first assignment in Coconino National Forest almost became my last. Not because I quit, because I almost didn't come back. And when I tell you what happened, you need to understand something first. I'm trained for this. Search and rescue, wilderness survival, emergency medicine. I know how to read terrain, how to track, how to stay calm when things go wrong. None of that training prepared me for what I found at Bear Sign Trailhead, or what found me 3 weeks later, when I started understanding why he never came back. His name was in the case file they gave me during orientation. A ranger who'd worked the same district back in 1998 went out for a routine 2-day hike in the Red Rock Secret Mountain Wilderness and vanished. Vehicle found at the trailhead, pack gone, no body. No evidence. Just a note left at the ranger station saying he was heading into the backcountry for a couple days. The file was still open technically, but after 20-something years, everyone treated it like he'd fallen into a ravine somewhere, gotten covered by debris, and became part of the forest. Happens more than people think. The Coconino doesn't always give back what it takes. What bothered me was the note. I saw a photocopy of it in the file. Handwriting neat, professional. The kind of thing you'd expect from someone who filled out incident reports for a living. But there was something off about the phrasing. Heading into the wilderness for a few days. Need to see something. Not going hiking. Not taking some personal time. Need to see something. Like he'd been called. Like there was an appointment he couldn't miss. I didn't think much about it those first 2 weeks. I was busy learning the trails, meeting the locals who knew the area better than any map, getting used to the 7,000-foot elevation and how the ponderosa pine forests seemed to stretch forever in every direction. Beautiful country. The kind of landscape that makes you feel small, but in a good way, like you're part of something bigger. I loved it. I understood why he'd wanted to work here. I understood why he'd gone out on his days off to explore deeper. Then I started noticing the pull. That's the only word I have for it. A pull. Not physical, nothing you could point to or measure, but a persistent sense that I needed to go somewhere specific. It started small. I'd be doing paperwork at the station and find myself thinking about the Bear Sign Trailhead, wondering what the light looked like up there in the morning. I'd be eating dinner and suddenly have this urge to check a map of the secret mountain wilderness, tracing the ridge lines with my finger, imagining what it would feel like to stand up there and look down. Normal thoughts for someone who loves hiking, right? Except they weren't my thoughts. They felt like someone else's ideas that had gotten into my head somehow. By week 3, I was dreaming about it. The same dream, every night. I'm standing on a ridge I've never been to, looking down into a canyon I don't recognize, and something in that canyon is looking back up at me. I can't see what it is. The dream never gives me that, but I know it's there, and I know it's been waiting, and I know I'm supposed to go down and meet it. I'd wake up sweating, my heart pounding, but here's the thing that scared me. Part of me wanted to go back to sleep and finish the dream. Part of me wanted to know what was waiting. I started planning the hike without deciding to plan it. I'd catch myself looking at my gear, mentally packing my bag, calculating how much water I'd need for a 3-day trip into the backcountry. I'd stand in front of the trail map at the station, staring at Bear Sign Trailhead, my finger hovering over the trails that led deeper into the wilderness. Other rangers would walk by and ask if I was okay, and I'd snap out of it, realize I'd been standing there for 20 minutes just staring. That's when I found my handwriting. I kept a duty log, standard procedure, notes about weather conditions, trail reports, wildlife sightings. I flipped back through it one afternoon and saw an entry I didn't remember writing. My handwriting, my pen, but I had zero memory of putting those words on the page. Need to see it. 3 days should be enough. Bear sign to secret mountain. Have to know what's there. The same phrasing, the same strange certainty. I was writing the exact kind of note he'd left before he disappeared. I should have told someone. I should have requested a transfer, taken some leave, done anything except what I did next. But the pull was so strong by then that rational thinking felt like background noise. I wanted to go. No, that's not right. I needed to go. Something in the secret mountain wilderness was waiting for me, and every day I delayed felt like breaking a promise I didn't remember making. I went to Bear Sign Trailhead on a Thursday morning. I told myself I was just going to look, just going to see why the place kept appearing in my thoughts. But I had my pack. I had 3 days of supplies. I had a trail map with a route marked in red ink that I didn't remember drawing. I parked where his vehicle had been found 27 years ago, and when I got out of my truck, the pull stopped. That constant pressure in my head, that sense of being tugged toward something, it cut off like someone had flipped a switch, and in the silence it left behind, I could think clearly for the first time in a week. I looked down at my pack. I looked at the trailhead. I understood with perfect, horrible clarity that if I started walking, I wouldn't come back. Not because something would kill me, because I wouldn't want to come back. Whatever was out there had spent 3 weeks preparing me, shaping my thoughts, building anticipation, making sure that when I finally arrived, I'd be ready to see it, ready to stay with it. I got back in my truck. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I drove back to the station, walked into my supervisor's office, and told him I needed to report something. I showed him my duty log. I showed him the route I'd marked on the map. I showed him how the phrasing matched the note from 1998. He listened quietly, and when I finished, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were 6 other reports. Different rangers, different years, all assigned to the same district. All of them had experienced the same pull. All of them had caught themselves planning the same hike. 2 of them had actually started the trail before turning back. The ranger who disappeared in 1998 was the only one who made it all the way. They found his vehicle, but they never found him, and my supervisor told me something that's kept me awake ever since. 3 years after the disappearance, a hiker reported seeing someone matching his description on a ridge near Secret Mountain, just standing there, watching the trail below. When the hiker waved, the figure didn't wave back. It just kept watching. By the time the hiker reported it and search teams went out, there was nothing there. I requested a transfer the next day. They granted it without question. I work in a completely different forest now, 2 states away, and I've never been back to Coconino. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel it. That pull, fainter now, like a radio signal from very far away, but still there, still patient, still waiting for me to finish what I started. And the worst part, the part that makes me check my duty logs every single day to make sure my handwriting hasn't changed, is that some small part of me still wants to know what I would have seen if I'd kept walking, what he saw, what made him stay. The Bear Sign Trailhead is still open. People hike it every day without incident. It's a beautiful area, and most visitors have wonderful experiences. But if you're ever assigned to work in that district, and you start feeling a pull you can't explain, and you catch yourself planning a hike you don't remember deciding to take, I need you to do something for me. Look at what you've written. Check your notes, your maps, your logs, and if you see the words, need to see something, get out. Request a transfer. Quit if you have to. Because whatever is waiting in the secret mountain wilderness has been there a long time, and it knows exactly how to call the people who will come looking for it. The ranger who disappeared in 1998 wasn't the first. I know that now, and unless something changes, he won't be the last. Most people who hike in the Coconino remember the scent first, fresh pine and dry, ancient soil mingling beneath an endless, incisive blue sky. You inhale that and believe, for a few heartbeats, this forest is familiar, gentle, even inviting. But altitude changes things. I learned that the hard way last September, and the lesson nearly cost me more than my life. It almost cost me myself. I had wanted to hike Humphreys Peak for months. It's Arizona's highest point, a place where the world thins out above 12,000 feet, and the air, cold and dry, gnaws at anything soft. I wasn't new to climbing. I'd done Rainier with frostbitten toes, crawled halfway up Kilimanjaro in freezing fog. Humphreys was supposed to be simple, the perfect victory lap before settling back into city routines. That morning, I packed my gear with a familiar confidence, leashed to old habits, socks layered, trail mix stashed, extra water, page-worn topographic map in my back pocket, just in case the GPS lost its mind like I'd been warned can happen around those ridges. Even the trailhead felt normal. Quiet crunch of gravel, a couple other hikers prepping in the weak morning light. As I left tree-line behind, the landscape sharpened. Bristle-cone pines twisted like ancient hands, low grass bristling in gusts that bite harder the higher you get. My first few breaths were easy. By the end of that first mile, my lungs had started to protest, gently at first, then with an almost amused insistence. Classic altitude, I figured. As the switchbacks grew steeper, my legs burned in rhythm with my breathing. I moved slower, conserving energy, unconsciously following patterns etched by thousands before me. Halfway up, the cold grew sharper, carrying needles of wind straight off the snow patches clinging stubbornly to the shade. It was here I saw the first shadow, just a flicker, a brief dark motion behind a cluster of rocks. Maybe it was a marmot, I thought, or a crow hopscotching the boulders in search of food. I barely paused, recentering myself, but the taste of something odd lingered in my mouth. Metal. Not blood, but something old, like the tang of rust on rain-soaked iron. A little voice started talking inside my head. It wasn't panic. Years of climbing had taught me to ignore intrusive thoughts and to catalog the difference between real threats and altitude-fueled hallucinations. But even then, the sense of being watched bubbled up, slow, rough, acidic. I started to realize all the little noises, my pack strap squeaking, water sloshing in my bottle, were accompanied by something else. A pulse, faint but distinct, coming from ahead and above, always on the edge of perception. Not footsteps, not animal noises, just this consistent rhythmic pressure in the air. I took a break at the saddle, pausing to catch my breath and gulp water. My hands trembled slightly. The sky arched overhead, dazzling, almost painfully bright. For one disorienting moment, I felt like the mountain itself was moving under my feet, the ground breathing, causing the rocks to lift and settle. It passed quickly, but I remembered every guidebook warning. Know the signs of acute mountain sickness, dizziness, confusion, hallucination. But this wasn't confusion. If anything, my senses sharpened. The smell of dry stone. That faint metallic taste, the itch in my fingers as I gripped my trekking poles too tightly. The next stretch passed in a blur of physical discomfort. My breathing became heavier, more urgent. I felt every heartbeat pounding against my ribs. Shadows reappeared, more frequently this time. Not animals, shapes that seemed just off. If I focused hard, they crisped into impossible geometry, angles and motions that didn't belong to living creatures. Each time I blinked, they retreated, dissolving into the stones. But the true horror came after I crossed above 12,000 feet, where the tundra opens up, and the air feels stripped of everything but cold and silence. I stumbled, knees shaking, muscles twitching, and refusing ordinary orders. The landscape felt larger there, as if the summit wasn't a point, but a threshold. The pines disappeared. Everything flattened to open sky, pale grass struggling against rock. I was utterly exposed. And then the cold changed. It wasn't just temperature anymore. It was a presence, wrapping me from every direction. I felt it inside my joints, sliding slick up my spine, anchoring itself in places I could only feel, never see. I tried to force my legs to move faster, desperate now to reach the top, to escape that oppressive, enveloping chill. But the summit never got closer. It stretched away, the last few hundred yards elongating with every step. That's when the mountain revealed its secret. One moment the landscape was empty. The next, a figure hovered at the edge of vision, tall, thin, flickering, almost translucent, as if manifested from the thin air and high altitude itself. Its face, if you could call it that, was only an outline, sliced into the wind. It stood perfectly still, perfectly silent, but every part of me knew it was watching, measuring, studying. Every biological instinct I had rebelled. My heart hammered out a warning. My breath caught painfully. I could taste that metallic tang again, stronger now, as if inhaling from a rusted pipe. My extremities throbbed with numbness, pain laced with sensation. I thought of frostbite, but it was everywhere, not just my fingers or toes. And still, the figure never moved. The cold pulsed outward, wrapping me tighter. I felt myself slipping, not just physically but mentally, thoughts dilating as layers of time and memory unraveled. Then it came closer, not step by step but all at once. It inhaled, and the air trembled. The pressure on my chest grew unbearable, my vision tunneling, heart in full panic. I tried to retreat, but my body wouldn't answer. My muscles were locked, frozen in obedience to a command I didn't understand. My mind fractured. I wasn't alone in my own head anymore. The thing, whatever had waited at this altitude, was inside me, exploring, learning, hungry. I collapsed. Not a graceful rest. My knees gave out. Darkness bled over my eyes. The world pulsed in cold waves, full minutes stretching into forever. I heard the wind howl, but it wasn't just air anymore. It was voices, ancient and layered, the memory of every climber swallowed by this peak. I saw images, brief flashes, a hand grasping stone, eyes wide with terror, a face smeared with blood. None of them were mine, but I felt their fear, tasted it in that metal-tinged air. I woke at twilight, sprawled awkward atop the summit. My gear lay scattered. Poles abandoned yards behind me. The figure, the presence, had vanished. The wind now felt ordinary, biting but without that consuming hold. My hands and feet burned, tingling with returning circulation. But I was different. The mountain hadn't just frightened me, it had hollowed something out inside, as if making room for a new passenger. Hiking back down was a blur, body on autopilot, mind spinning through fragments of memory and unanswered questions. I passed other hikers on the descent, a mother and son, a pair of college kids underdressed for the cold. None of them looked twice at me, though I must have been pale and wild-eyed. I kept tasting metal, kept feeling that pressure on my chest ease only slightly. Even now, weeks later, I dream of that summit, that moment of complete exposure and helplessness. Sometimes, if the night is cold enough, I feel the presence again, sliding alongside my thoughts. I wonder if anyone else has encountered it, if the missing climbers each year find more than just ice and thin air at the top. The official warnings say to watch for altitude sickness, dizziness, nausea, confusion, headaches. They don't say anything about what waits in the thin air if you climb too high, or if you breathe too deeply of something old and patient, something the mountain has preserved for thousands of years. I still climb, but not as carelessly. I watch my breath, count my heartbeats, listen for footsteps that don't belong to animals or people. When a chill crawls up my spine, I remind myself the air up here is not the same. And sometimes, when I look out from a high ridge and the wind shifts suddenly, I sense that presence, that hunger. Still waiting, still watching, never truly gone, but living in the silence between heartbeats. If you ever find yourself hiking the upper reaches of Coconino and your breath feels weighed down, if the shadows flicker and your skin pulses with cold from within, heed the warning. Turn back. Focus on the living sounds, on the real wind, and promise never to inhale too deeply. Because if you do, the mountain will know, and what it gives will not be something you can simply breathe out. You ever been so close to a cliff face that you can feel it breathing? Not wind, not your own nerves, but something in the rock itself, flexing around you. That sounds ridiculous, I know. I thought so too, right up until the day the Mogollon Rim tried to take me. If we were sitting together right now, knees almost touching, rope coiled on the floor between us, I'd look you in the eye and tell you this. Some walls don't want you on them, and some of them learn how to make sure you don't come back. I've been climbing for over 15 years, guiding for 10. I've taken beginners up their first slabs and led multi-pitch routes in places that make seasoned climbers swallow hard. I know rock. I know anchors, friction, angles. I know what failure looks like when it's human error, and what it looks like when it's bad luck. Before the rim, I didn't believe in anything else. A route was either objectively dangerous or it wasn't. The stone didn't get a say. The Mogollon Rim is this massive escarpment stretching across northern Arizona, including parts of Coconino. If you've seen it, you know, miles of broken cliff line, layers of sandstone and limestone stacked like jagged teeth. Most climbers stick to established routes, the lines that have names and grades and little notes in guidebooks. My mistake was deciding to scout new ground. It was late fall, cool and clear, that perfect crisp air that makes your hands stick to the rock like they're meant for it. A friend had tipped me off about a section of the rim that, as far as anyone knew, didn't have any formal routes yet. Perfect height, decent rock from a distance, and a big, clean overhang partway down that looked like a dream for teaching advanced technique once properly bolted. We'll call it the overhang because I never gave it a real route name. It never earned one. I hiked in with a light rack, a couple of bolts for emergencies, and a static rope for inspection. The approach was familiar enough. Ponderosa forest thinning toward the edge, ground dropping away in sudden heart-stopping glimpses of empty space. From the top, the overhang looked gorgeous. A smooth, outward bulging ceiling about 40 feet down, then vertical again to the base. No obvious loose blocks, no big water streaks. A blank canvas. I built a bomber anchor on top, triple-checked it, threaded the rope, and rigged to rappel. This is the part that should have been routine. I've done this hundreds of times. You weight the rope, edge over, feet searching for purchase, settle into the rhythm of descent. That's exactly how it started. The top section was rough, but trustworthy sandstone. My feet found good edges. My hands, gloved, fed rope smoothly through my device. The drop yawned below, but that's just another day on the job. The first sign something was wrong was the sound. Rock has a voice. Tap it, scrape it, lean into it, and it'll tell you a lot about its health. Solid stone gives you this reassuring dull thump, or that dense silence that says, I've been here a long time. Hollow stone has a different sound, echoey, drum-like, suspicious. As I eased down toward the overhang, my right foot brushed a patch of rock that sounded wrong. Not hollow exactly, but tense, like a held breath. I paused, hanging in space, and swung gently to get a better look. The underside of the overhang was darker than the wall above, streaked with old mineral stains. From a distance, it had looked smooth, but up close, there were thin, horizontal fissures running along its length, like lips pressed tightly together. I felt my stomach tighten. Fissures like that can indicate potential break lines, big, flat break lines. I told myself that was fine. I wasn't planning to put a route straight through the overhang, just scout it. I kept going, slower now, listening, feeling each foot placement. My rope hummed faintly, running over the edge above. My breathing sounded loud inside my helmet. About 10 feet below the lip of the overhang, the temperature changed. It was subtle, but my face felt it first. The air got a degree or two colder, denser. I've been in caves. I know that sensation. Cold air pooling where sun never touches. But this was a sheer wall, fully exposed, afternoon light hitting it directly. There shouldn't have been any temperature gradient like that. I told myself it was my imagination. Then my left hand brushed the rock just below the main fissure, and every hair on my arm stood up. It wasn't like touching static, and it wasn't a shock. It was more like putting your palm on the skin of a sleeping animal and feeling the muscles underneath twitch in response. Just a tiny, involuntary flinch. The stone under my glove felt alive. Not warm, not soft, still stone. But there was a momentary, unmistakable sense of something reacting to my contact. I snatched my hand back so fast my rappel device jerked. My heart hammered in my chest, absurdly loud now. I hung there. Boots pressed lightly against the wall, listening, as if the rock was going to say something out loud. Instead, it moved. Not by much. If you'd been watching from the ground, you might not have noticed at all. But my entire body was keyed into that surface. I felt a tiny shift, a settling maybe, or a flexing, run through the stone directly beneath the overhang, like a muscle clenching. The rope above creaked as it adjusted to the new angle. A few grains of sand rained down past my face. At that point, any sane person would have gone back up, ascend the rope, reset, pick a different section of wall, call it a day. I wish I could tell you that's what I did, but pride is a hell of a drug, and fear does weird things to your judgment. I told myself I was overreacting. Stone moves. Microfractures adjust. It's normal. I took a breath, forced my legs to relax, and lowered the last few feet until my shoulders were level with the overhang. I needed to see into the crack. From below, the main fissure was about as wide as my fingers, running horizontally along the underside like a closed eye. Smaller cracks branched off from it, trailing into darkness. I flicked my headlamp on, leaned in as far as I dared, and peered inside. I expected to see shadow and dust. What I saw instead made my mouth go dry. The fissure wasn't empty. It was lined with something, not roots, not mineral deposits. It looked like strands, thin, pale, fibrous, woven along the crack's inner surface, disappearing deeper into the rock. They reminded me of tendons more than anything, old dried tendons stretched just under translucent skin. As my light swept along, some of them seemed to twitch, recoiling from the beam like earthworms exposed to air. I jerked back instinctively, heel scraping. The moment my boot shifted, the world lurched. It started as a shiver in the stone, then became a full-body tremor under my feet. Chunks of grit and pebbles broke loose and pattered down. The rope jumped, and my device squealed as tension changed abruptly. A cold, mechanical part of my brain noted, something is loading the anchor from a new direction. Then my belay device locked up. I hadn't touched it. My brake hand was nowhere near the rope, but suddenly, no matter how I tried to feed line, it wouldn't budge. It was like someone up top had grabbed the rope with both hands and yanked it taut, pinning me in place directly under the overhang. Panic tastes metallic. My mouth flooded with it. I swore loudly. The sound snatched away by the open air. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. The rope had snagged on something. The anchor had twisted. The device had jammed. I forced myself to check. I tried to bounce gently to get a feel for the system. The moment I did, the overhang answered. I heard, felt, a long, low crack travel through the rock above me. Not a sharp snap, not the report of a single block breaking free. This was deeper, a groaning like ice shifting under pressure, or a board bowed almost to its breaking point. Dust billowed from the fissure, and from inside it came a sound I hope I never hear again. A soft sliding, like teeth grinding slowly together behind a closed mouth. The rope above shifted again, without my hand on it. It was being pulled. Not up, not down, but sideways, into the plane of the wall. My harness dug into my hips as I twisted toward the rock, my face inches from that trembling, lined crack. The sense of something on the other side, pushing, pressing, testing the cords and knots that held me there, was overwhelming. I did the only thing I could think of. I drew my knife. Every climber carries one for emergencies. Ropes caught, gear stuck, injuries requiring fast action. I never imagined I'd use it on my own lifeline mid-rappel, but there I was, knife blade shaking in my hand, sawing at the taut rope above my device as the stone flexed closer, closer, like a fist closing. The first cuts barely frayed it. Dynamic climbing rope is tough by design. My arm burned as I worked, breath coming in short, harsh bursts. A strand snapped, then another. With each one, the tension in the line changed, rippling through the system, bouncing against whatever force was pulling from the wall. For a heartbeat, everything held. Then three things happened at once. The last core fibers of the rope parted with a wrenching pop. The overhang exhaled, a gust of air warm and foul rushing from the fissure against my face, and I fell. It wasn't a long fall. My backup line, because I am, at my core, a paranoid professional, caught me after about 15 feet, the sudden jerk slamming the harness into my ribs hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I spun, smacking into the wall below the overhang, scraping skin off my knuckles and cheek. Above me, something large and heavy moved, but didn't commit to breaking free. Dust poured past like a dry waterfall. For a moment, I hung there, gasping, half convinced the entire overhang was going to come down on top of me. But the rock stilled. The groaning stopped. The only sounds left were my ragged breaths and the distant hiss of wind along the rim. I don't clearly remember the climb back up. Muscle memory took over. Prusik knots, mechanical ascenders, every trick I've ever learned to get a human body up a rope in a hurry. I know I scraped my shins raw and bruised both knees. I know my arms shook so badly near the top I almost dropped my gear. What I remember most vividly is the sensation all the way up that something in that overhang was watching my progress. Not with malice, exactly, with interest. Like a spider taking note of a fly that had almost made it out of the web. When I finally rolled over the lip onto solid ground, I lay there for a long time, face pressed into pine needles, rope pooled around me like the shed skin of something sick. When I could stand, I crawled to the anchor. The main line I'd cut was still threaded through, ends frayed and blackened, where the tension had seared them against the rock. The backup line, miraculously, was intact. But at the edge, right where the rope had run over the lip, I saw something that made my stomach flip. The stone was scored, not just by rope friction, though there were those familiar smooth grooves. Overlapping them were deeper marks, thin and deliberate, angling inward. 4 parallel gouges, no wider than fingers, carved into the rock as if something inside had dragged its hand along, reaching for the rope as it jerked free. I left the anchor, packed what I could with shaking hands, and hiked out, every step away from that cliff, feeling like a retreat from a predator that might change its mind and give chase. I didn't tell my clients what had happened. I didn't tell the other guides the whole truth. I said the rock was unstable, that the overhang had bad fracture lines, that I'd had a scare and decided it wasn't worth developing. All technically true. None of it covered the part where the wall had grabbed my rope first. The nightmares started a week later. In them, I'm always back under that overhang, except this time there is no backup line. The fissure slowly opens like a mouth, and inside is not a void but more stone, layered and folded like muscle, flexing, reaching. My rope doesn't snap in those dreams. It gets pulled in, strand by strand, swallowed into the crack, dragging me with it. I haven't climbed on the rim since. There are plenty of other routes, other crags, other safe pieces of rock that have never so much as shifted under my hands. I still guide, but not there. When new climbers talk about seeking untouched lines, and virgin walls in places like Coconino, I feel that old chill along my spine. You can laugh this off if you want. Tell yourself it was a freak geological event, a tired guide spooking herself. That's fine. I've made my peace with the fact that not everything I've experienced will fit neatly into an incident report. But if you ever find yourself dangling under a big, beautiful overhang in that forest, and you feel the rock move in a way that doesn't match the wind or your own motion, if the air suddenly changes temperature, if you hear something that sounds less like cracking and more like something adjusting, listen to me like I'm right there next to you. Get off that wall. Don't touch the fissures that look too smooth, too horizontal. Don't trust a rope that suddenly goes tight without your hand on it. And if you feel, even for a second, that the cliff is no longer a thing you're climbing on, but a thing you're inside of, trying to get out of, believe that feeling. Some overhangs aren't just rock. They're mouths, and they've been waiting a lot longer than you've been climbing. You know how some people love the idea of peace and quiet so much they fantasize about turning the whole world off for a while. No cars, no phones, no distant highway noise, just you and nature. That used to sound perfect to me too, but after what happened up on the plateau in the Coconino, the thought of true silence makes my skin crawl. Because once you've been in a place where sound stops behaving like it should, where your own voice doesn't come back to you, you realize how much of your sanity depends on echoes. I'm a meteorologist by training, not some ghost hunter. My work is all about air, temperature, pressure, humidity, wind gradients. I was brought in on a study a couple of years ago, looking at microclimates across the Coconino Plateau. On paper, it was straightforward. Set up a series of portable weather stations across the high country around 7,000 feet. Collect data on temperature inversions, wind anomalies, things like that. Flagstaff's perched at a pretty unique spot, and the forest around it has a reputation for sudden weather swings. That's what we were there to quantify. Nothing supernatural, just numbers. On my first day deploying instruments, I fell in love with the place. The plateau feels like a different world from the desert people imagine when they think Arizona. Tall stands of ponderosa, open meadows, that high, thin light that makes the air feel almost clean enough to drink. I set up station after station, anchoring tripods, checking anemometers, making sure our barometers were calibrated. All very clinical, all very normal. It wasn't until week 2 that I noticed the first anomaly. I was alone at one of the northern sites, a small clearing ringed by trees, with a good line of sight in all directions. I needed to run an acoustic test, clapping near the sensors, to timestamp when my actions took place relative to the instrument's recorded spikes. I do this all the time. You clap, you hear the sound bounce off nearby surfaces. You see the spike on your graph. Easy. I clapped once, hard. The sound cracked in my hands, and then nothing. No echo. No soft reflection off trunks or the ground. Just the initial smack, like dropping a stone into a void. I stood there, hands still raised, waiting for the tiny comeback of sound I've taken for granted my entire life. It never came. I tried again, louder. Again the clap itself, sharp and immediate, and then a dead, absolute stop. Imagine shouting into a closet full of clothes and hearing your voice cut off like someone pressed mute right after the first word. That's what it felt like. The air around me absorbed everything. I remember telling myself it was just the way the trees and ground were positioned, that the sound was being scattered instead of reflected. I'm trained to find physical explanations. But when I got back to the truck and played the audio off the station's microphone, my skin prickled. The recording caught the clap, a hiss of ambient noise, and then a drop in volume, like the whole soundscape sagged, and then a slow, unnatural fade back to normal. The graph of decibels dipped in a way I'd never seen before, like something heavy had pressed down on the sound, then lifted. I flagged it as Location 7 anomaly in my notes and moved on. Scientists see odd data all the time. That's what makes research interesting. But over the next 10 days, similar things kept happening, always in certain small pockets on the plateau. I'd be walking through the forest, listening to the wind in the branches, the hiss of needles brushing needles, and I'd cross an invisible line where everything would go dull. Not silent exactly. More like the sound had been padded, wrapped in cotton. My footsteps would go from crunching leaf litter to soft, almost underwater thuds. If I dropped a rock, the impact sounded distant, even if it landed right by my boot. After a while, I started mapping them. Little circles on my topo maps labeled DZ for dead zone, radii of 50 to 100 feet where sound just didn't bounce. The pressure readings in those spots were always slightly off, nothing dramatic enough to alarm a layperson, but enough for me to notice. A subtle drop, like micro pockets of lower pressure sitting in the forest like invisible ponds. You're probably wondering why I stayed, why I didn't pack it in after the first one. The honest answer is curiosity. The little glowing answer in the back of every scientist's mind. This is new. This is interesting. And under that, if I'm being fully honest with you, was another feeling I didn't want to name at the time. Those dead zones had a pull. The relief of stepping into them after a long day of wind and equipment noise was comforting, like putting on noise-canceling headphones after a busy subway ride. My shoulders would drop, my jaw unclenched. The quiet felt safe. Until it didn't. One afternoon, I decided to do a controlled test. I chose the largest dead zone I'd mapped so far, a roughly oval patch in a stand of pines, set out little battery-powered speakers at its edge, and played a tone at a fixed volume while walking in and out of the zone with a handheld recorder. If the sound was being absorbed, I wanted to quantify it. Simple experiment. Outside the zone, the tone was normal, annoying, steady, everything I expected. But as I crossed in, it thinned. Not quieter in the usual way. It lost the tail of itself. Every pulse was like a pinprick, there and gone without any of the ringing that should follow. I stood dead center, the tone stabbing at the edge of hearing, and felt like I was in the eye of a storm I couldn't perceive. That's when I heard the footsteps. Soft, measured. Behind me, crunch of needles. A tiny shift of weight. I turned, expecting to see a hiker, maybe someone from the Forest Service checking on what I was doing. There was no one, just the trees, tall and straight, their bark textured like old skin. I told myself it was an animal, a deer, maybe even a squirrel amplified in the unnatural quiet. I called out anyway. Hello? The word left my mouth clear and strong and then died 6 inches away. No echo, no sense of space. Speaking in that zone felt wrong, like my voice wasn't allowed to touch the world around me. The footsteps came again, closer this time. I spun, heart climbing into my throat. Same thing, nothing there. No visible movement, no branches swaying, just the impression deep in my body that someone stood just outside my field of view, stepping when I wasn't looking, stopping when I was. My recorder, hanging from its strap at my chest, clicked softly as it reached the end of its cycle and began a new file. That little sound, instead of reassuring me, made my skin crawl. Because I knew right then how this story would sound to anyone else. Wind, footsteps, a scared scientist talking to herself in an empty forest, a trick of acoustics, a tired brain misfiring. That's what I would have told anyone else in my position. I left the speakers running and stepped out of the dead zone. The change was immediate. The tone filled back out, gained body and resonance. My footsteps sounded like footsteps again, not muffled ghosts of themselves. I stood at the edge, looking in. The patch of forest inside looked no different than the patch I was standing in. Same trees, same undergrowth, same sunlight slanting through. But my heart pounded harder when I faced that innocuous circle than it had in any thunderstorm. I should have stopped there. I didn't. A few days later, I volunteered for an overnight at our central station to babysit some equipment. One of the dead zones lay only a 15-minute walk away, and I told myself I'd take a quick hike before sunset to grab more data. I didn't tell anyone that I'd also started dreaming about them. About walking through forests where all sound fell flat, and something vast used that silence like cover. The sun was low when I reached the zone, painting the trunks gold. I stepped inside and felt the familiar pillow of quiet wrap around me. This time the comfort hit first. I don't know how to describe it except to say it felt like sinking into a warm bath after days of tension. The absence of echo made it feel like I was the only real thing in the world, like nothing existed beyond my skin unless I chose to invite it in. I sat down with my back against a tree in the center, closed my eyes, and just listened. To nothing. No birds, no wind whispering, no distant hum of cars from the highway. The tone for my experiment wasn't there. I'd left the speakers behind. It was just me and the soft thump of my own heart and the rush of my breathing. For a moment, it was peaceful. Then very gently, something changed. The rhythm of my heartbeat, steady and familiar, slipped. Not in my chest. It was still there, thumping along, but in the air around me. I started to hear it a second time, faintly out of sync, like an echo picked up and replayed a fraction of a beat later. Lub-dub in my ribs, and then a ghostly lub-dub in the space inches from my ear. I froze. The second heartbeat wasn't exactly like mine. It was slower, heavier. I opened my eyes, but nothing in the circle had moved. No shadows crossed the ground. No branches shifted. But that second heartbeat stayed. When mine sped up in fear, it didn't. When mine began to stutter, almost tripping over itself, the other beats stayed calm, measured. Listening. I whispered, without meaning to, "Who's there?" The words felt wrong, leaving my mouth, like I'd broken some unspoken rule of the place. The silence pushed back, not with anger, not with sound, but with weight. My ears popped gently, like they do in a plane during descent. For a horrible second, I couldn't hear my own breathing anymore. All I had was that other heartbeat, steady in the air in front of me. People talk about fight or flight. In that moment, my body chose a third option: freeze. I couldn't move, couldn't stand. I could barely make my fingers twitch against the pine needles. Something in that dead zone had gotten hold of the small, instinctive part of me that recognizes predator from prey, and it had decided I wasn't done yet. I don't know how long we sat like that, me pinned to the ground by my own terror, that invisible rhythm pacing my heart from the outside. Eventually, a new sound bled in from the edges, faint at first, then clearer. The rustle of branches in a breeze, a distant bird call, the plateau's normal soundtrack reasserting itself like someone slowly lifting a heavy lid. The other heartbeat faded with it, receding until I was alone with my own racing pulse. Air rushed back into my ears in a wave, bringing with it the crackle of leaves, the creak of wood, the far-off rumble of a truck on a highway. My body unlocked. I scrambled to my feet, nearly fell, and stumbled out of the circle as fast as my shaking legs would carry me. At the edge, I turned back once. The dead zone looked like nothing at all, just a patch of forest. If you didn't know, you'd walk through without noticing, maybe feel a moment's odd quiet, and then forget it. I knew. I also knew, with the kind of certainty that doesn't come from instruments or graphs, that those places aren't accidents. They're pockets. Rooms, almost. Spaces where something old and patient has learned to turn down the world's volume so it can better hear us, alone and unguarded. I finished the contract, wrote my reports, filed my anomalies with all the right technical language, localized attenuation of sound, pressure irregularities, possible topographical causes. I did not mention the second heartbeat. I did not mention the way those zones felt when you stood in them alone at dusk. But I kept my maps, marked every dead zone. And I'm telling you this now, as if we're sharing a table and a cup of coffee, because you need to understand. If you're ever hiking the plateau and you cross an invisible line where your footsteps go flat and your voice doesn't bounce, don't sit down. Don't enjoy the quiet. Don't mistake that sense of calm for safety. Walk through, keep talking, keep making noise, because out there, in those pockets of stolen sound, something is listening for the people who've forgotten what their own echoes sound like. And once it has the rhythm of your heart, you never quite stop hearing it listen back. You ever follow someone on a trail without meaning to? You know what I mean? You're hiking at your own pace, and there's someone ahead, moving just a little faster or a little slower, and you end up in this weird dance where you keep seeing them around every bend. It's awkward, but harmless. That's what I thought was happening on the Vultee Arch Trail in Coconino, until I looked at the timestamp on my photos and realized the person I'd been following for 4 hours had been dead for 27 years. I'm not from Arizona. I'm from Ohio, and I don't hike much back home. Flatlands, mostly. But I was out in Sedona for a work conference, had an afternoon free, and figured I'd do the tourist thing. Vultee Arch came recommended. Moderate difficulty, 6 miles round trip, beautiful payoff at the end, with a natural stone arch framing the canyon. Perfect. I parked at the trailhead around noon, laced up my boots, grabbed my water bottle, and started walking. The trail was busy that day. Families with kids, a couple of older folks with trekking poles, a few solo hikers like me. I passed some people. Others passed me. Normal trail traffic. About a mile in, I noticed someone ahead, maybe 100 yards up the switchback, moving at a steady pace. All I could see was the back of their head, a dark jacket, and a small pack. Nothing unusual. But every time the trail curved and I expected to either catch up or lose sight of them, there they were again. Same distance, same pace. At first, I didn't think much of it. Trails have a rhythm. Sometimes you sync up with someone without trying. But as the miles ticked by, it started to feel odd. I'd stop to drink water, check my phone, take a picture of the red rocks glowing in the sunlight. And when I looked up, the figure would still be there, same distance ahead, never stopping, never looking back. I started taking photos just to document the weirdness. Each time I raised my phone, I'd frame them in the shot. That dark jacket, the back of their head, the small pack, always right there on the trail ahead. By the 3rd mile, I was getting irritated. The trail wasn't that long or that winding. If they were moving at a consistent pace and I kept stopping, they should have pulled way ahead by now. Or I should have closed the gap when I pushed harder on the uphill sections. But the distance stayed the same. It felt like they were adjusting their speed to match mine, staying just far enough ahead that I couldn't quite make out details, but close enough that I never lost sight of them. Other hikers passed me going the opposite direction. I'd nod, say hi, ask if they'd seen the person ahead. A couple people gave me blank looks. One woman said, "You're the first person I've seen in the last 20 minutes." That didn't make sense. I'd literally just watched the figure round the bend 30 seconds before she came down. I kept walking, my stomach starting to twist. The trail markers weren't where I expected them. I'm not an expert, but I'd studied the map at the trailhead, and I knew there were signs at the 2-mile and 4-mile marks. I passed the 2-mile sign fine, but the next marker I hit said 4 miles, even though my watch insisted I'd only walked another 20 minutes. I checked my phone's GPS. It kept jumping, recalibrating, showing me in spots I'd already passed. The little blue dot would flicker, then snap back to a different section of trail entirely. The figure ahead never wavered. Same jacket, same stride, same distance. I started to feel like I was being led, not followed, led. Like I was the one being controlled, even though I was behind them. The trail opened up briefly onto a ridge with a clear view, and I stopped to catch my breath. The figure kept walking, moving along the ridgeline, silhouetted against the bright sky. I lifted my phone again, zoomed in as much as I could, and snapped a picture. When I looked at the screen, my skin went cold. The timestamp was wrong. The photo I'd just taken, right then, in broad daylight, with my watch reading 2:47 p.m., had a timestamp of May 19th, 1998, 2:47 p.m. I stared at it, refreshed the gallery, checked my phone's date and time settings. Everything was correct on my end. But that photo, and when I scrolled back, every other photo I'd taken of that figure had the same wrong date. The same year, 1998. My hands started shaking. I looked up. The figure was still there, still walking, now disappearing around a curve of red rock. I should have turned back. Every instinct in my body screamed to turn back. But I didn't. I needed to see. I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if something real was happening. So I kept walking, faster now, pushing to close the gap. The arch came into view, a stunning curve of sandstone perched on the canyon's edge, exactly like the photos. Beautiful, serene, empty. No one else was there. And standing directly beneath the arch, back still to me, was the figure. They weren't moving anymore, just standing, facing out toward the drop, perfectly still. I stopped about 20 feet away, breathing hard. My voice caught in my throat. "Hey," I called out, my voice cracking. "Excuse me." The figure didn't turn, didn't acknowledge me. The wind picked up, and I heard it whistling through the arch, but their jacket didn't move. No rustle, no shift. Like they were painted onto the landscape. I took another step closer, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera again. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I zoomed in on their back, focused, and saw something that made my stomach drop. The jacket wasn't just dark. It was worn thin, sun-faded, in uneven patches, fraying at the seams. The pack was old, the kind with an external frame that hadn't been popular in decades. And around the figure's waist was a fanny pack, bright teal, with a white stripe. Exactly the kind of thing someone would have worn in the 90s. I took the picture. The shutter sound clicked in the silence. The figure turned its head, not all the way. Just enough that I saw the edge of a profile. No features. Just a blurred, indistinct shadow where a face should have been. Then, like static clearing, they were gone. Not walking away. Not disappearing behind a rock. Just gone, like someone had clicked delete. I stood there for a full minute, heart hammering, staring at the empty space beneath the arch. Then I turned and ran. I didn't care about the photos, the trail, or the scenery. I just needed off that mountain. I passed other hikers on the way down, real solid people who said hello, who moved out of the way, who looked at me like I was crazy for running. I didn't stop until I reached my car, threw myself inside, and locked the doors like something could follow me out. That night, back at my hotel, I went through the photos. 47 pictures of the same person's back, taken over 4 hours, all with the wrong timestamp. May 19th, 1998. I looked it up. On that exact date, a wilderness ranger disappeared in Coconino National Forest. His truck was found at a trailhead. His gear was gone. They never found a body. In the missing person report, there was a photo of him from his ranger ID. He was wearing a dark jacket and carrying a small pack. And around his waist, barely visible in the image, a bright teal fanny pack with a white stripe. I showed the photos to a park ranger the next morning before I left. She looked at them quietly, then handed my phone back and said, "You should delete those." I asked why. She just shook her head. "People see him sometimes. Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't hurt anyone. But if you keep looking, if you keep following, sometimes he turns around, and you don't want to see what's left of his face." I deleted the photos. Every single one. But I can still see him in my head. That figure always just ahead, always the same distance, always leading people deeper into trails they think they know. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't hike in Coconino at all. Because if you ever find yourself on a trail, and there's someone ahead who never stops, never tires, and no one else seems to see, don't follow them. Don't try to catch up. Don't take their picture. Just turn around and leave. Because some people never left the trail. and they're still walking it, looking for someone else to walk with them forever. You know that feeling when a routine is so solid it's almost comforting. Same road, same time, same view out the windshield, day after day, until it feels like the world is nailed down and predictable. That was my life for 12 years on Perkinsville Road, cutting through the Coconino between Williams and Jerome. I'm telling you this like we're sitting in my truck right now with the engine idling and the dash lights on, because if you were in the passenger seat, you'd see how my hands start to shake when I talk about what began happening at exactly 8 a.m. on that road. You'd hear how my voice changes when I say this. Something out there learned my schedule. I work construction. Nothing fancy. Foundations, framing, concrete, the kind of work that leaves your clothes stiff with dust and your shoulders permanently sore. For over a decade, I had the same contract gig at a property outside Jerome. To get there from Williams, I could take the highways like everyone else, or I could shave 20 minutes off by using Perkinsville Road, a long, lonely dirt ribbon running through open forest and high desert. I chose the dirt. Every morning, I left my driveway at 7:15, hit the edge of the National Forest at 7:40, and by 8 a.m., like clockwork, I'd be deep in that stretch where the juniper's thin and the sky feels too big. For the first 11 years, nothing strange happened. It was just me, the truck, the road, and the occasional elk or coyote darting across. I knew every washboard section, every pothole, every blind curve. I could tell the season by the color of the grasses along the shoulder. That road felt like mine. The first time I saw it, I almost didn't register it as anything more than a trick of the light. It was June, dry, bright, already warm even that early. I remember because the dust cloud behind my truck hung in the air like fog when I checked my rear view. Up ahead, maybe 200 yards on the right side of the road where the junipers clumped closer, something tall was standing between the trees. At first, I thought it was just a particularly skinny trunk catching the sun weirdly. Then my brain made sense of the outline. Shoulders, head, long arms hanging down. Too tall and narrow for a person, too still to be an animal. Just a vertical shape against the mottled green. I did what anyone would do. I slowed down, squinted, told myself I was seeing things. The sun hit a bump in the dusty windshield, and for a second glare wiped the world out. By the time it cleared, the shape was gone. No broken branches, no animal loping away. Just trees and brush. I told myself it was my imagination, or some rancher standing out there in dark clothes who'd step back when he heard my engine. By the time I pulled into the job site, I'd half forgotten about it. Work will do that to you. A week later, at almost exactly the same stretch of road, around the same time, 8:03 on the dash, I saw it again. Same spot, same distance, same posture, not hunched, not leaning. Just upright, watching the road. This time, I was ready for it. I eased off the gas before I even got there, eyes locked on the tree line. I could feel my own pulse in my fingers on the wheel. As the truck crawled forward, the shape resolved against the shadows. Tall, dark, almost the color of wet bark, but not quite. The proportions were wrong for a normal person. Arms just a little too long, head a touch too high. My brain kept trying to snap it into a category: camper, hunter, hiker, and failing. Then, as if it knew I'd really seen it this time, it stepped back into the deeper shade and disappeared. Not a smooth, obvious motion. More like a blink. One moment it was there, the next, only branches. I drove the rest of the way to work, with my mouth dry and my eyes flicking constantly between the road and the mirror. I kept waiting to see it again behind me this time, standing dead center in the road, but the rear view showed only dust and sky. I could have chalked it up to stress, to age, to needing better glasses. I was ready to do exactly that, until August. By late summer, the mornings are cooler, but the sun still comes up early out there. The light goes from gray to blinding in minutes. That particular morning, I remember sipping burned gas station coffee, yawning, listening to some talk show drone on low. I wasn't even thinking about the June and July sightings until my phone buzzed in the cup holder. 8 a.m. calendar reminder to check in with a supplier. I looked down for half a second. When I looked back up, the road ahead wasn't empty. The figure was standing on the shoulder now, closer to the gravel, not tucked away in the trees. Maybe 50 yards ahead. Same height, easily 7 feet if it was an inch. Same narrow build. Only this time there was no mistaking it for a tree. It was facing the road directly, facing me. I slammed the brakes so hard the truck fishtailed. Tools clattered behind my seat. For a few wild heartbeats. I thought I was going to slide right off into the ditch, but the tires caught, and I came to a shuddering stop maybe 20 yards short. The world went very still. The engine idled rough. Dust drifted past the hood in slow, lazy waves. My hands were locked around the steering wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. And the thing, whatever it was, just stood there. It was so dark it seemed to drink in the morning light. I couldn't make out a face, just an impression of a head, shoulders, and arms that hung almost to its knees. Its outline wasn't crisp. It fuzzed at the edges like heat shimmer. I had this insane animal certainty that if I rolled down my window even an inch, I'd smell something that would live in my nightmares. We stared at each other, if you can call it that. I don't know if it had eyes, but I felt watched, scrutinized, measured. And then, in a motion so smooth it made my skin crawl, it turned. Not around. Up. It stepped back, one long stride, into the trees, and was gone again. I sat there shaking, breathing too fast, long after the spot where it had stood was just a patch of dusty shoulder. Eventually, I forced myself to throw the truck into gear and keep going, but the drive felt wrong after that. The road that I'd used like a private shortcut for years suddenly felt shared, like I'd finally noticed the other party in an arrangement I hadn't agreed to. That night, I tried to tell myself I'd seen some weird trick of light on a tall snag, but my body knew better. I woke up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, the image of that too tall silhouette burned into the backs of my eyelids. I told myself I'd start using the highway instead. Safer. Less weird. The next morning at 7:15, muscle memory dragged me back onto Perkinsville Road anyway. For a week, nothing happened. I timed my approach to that stretch like a patient timing a blood pressure spike, watching the dash clock tick toward 8 egg. Every day, I'd slow as I neared that bend, scan the tree line, see nothing, and then chuckle nervously to myself once I'd passed without incident. On the 8th day, the pattern changed. I didn't see it on the roadside anymore. I saw it closer. I'd just checked the clock, 8:02, when something flickered in my peripheral vision, not ahead, but level with my passenger window. I snapped my head to the right, expecting to see a branch whipping past or a deer bolting. There was nothing but trees and open space. Then, in the mirror, for just a heartbeat, I saw it, standing in the middle of the road behind me, directly in my tire tracks. Same height, same unnatural stillness. Only now there was a sense of intent radiating off it that made my whole body go cold. It wasn't just watching anymore. It had moved into my space on the road itself. I floored it. This time there was no question of slowing to study or rationalize. The truck rattled and bucked over ruts, protesting the speed, but I didn't back off until I hit pavement 10 minutes later. I pulled over on the shoulder of the highway, shaking so badly I had to sit with my forehead on the steering wheel for a solid 5 minutes. Here's where it goes from creepy to unbearable. That weekend, trying to prove to myself I wasn't losing it, I set up a camera on the dash. Nothing fancy, just my old phone propped up to record the windshield and road behind in the rear view. Part of me hoped I'd get nothing. That would have meant my mind was the only thing broken. Monday morning, I hit record at the forest boundary. The sunrise painted everything that gentle gold that usually makes me feel peaceful. I felt sick. The minutes ticked by. Dust plumed, birds scattered. The clock rolled from 7:59 to 8 her. At 8:01, the camera caught movement. On the footage, You don't see a full figure at first, just a distortion along the edge of the road. The junipers seem to bend around an invisible column, their branches curling slightly, as if pressed aside. As my truck rolls forward, something like a shadow peels out of the tree line and stands at the shoulder. You can tell yourself it's bad compression, dust on the lens, whatever helps you sleep. But when you pause it at just the right frame, there's no mistaking the shape. It's tall, it's humanoid, and as my truck passes, its head turns to follow. Then, a few seconds later, in the rear view section of the frame, it takes 2 long steps into the center of the road and stands there, facing away in the direction I'm going, like it's pacing me, like it knows where I'll be every morning, down to the minute. The worst part, when I scrubbed through the previous week's dash cam footage, the stuff I'd set up more out of habit than fear, I found it there too, faintly. Further back, first on the shoulder, then a little closer, then closer still. Always at around 8 a.m., always a little more forward, like it was closing the distance each day while I went about my routine, blissfully unaware. It had been watching me far longer than I'd realized. I took that footage to a friend of mine who works part-time with search and rescue. I didn't tell him what I thought it was. I just said, "Look at this and tell me if I'm crazy." He watched it in silence, scrubbed back and forth, zoomed in, frowned. Then he did something that scared me more than anything on that tape. He closed the video, slid my phone back to me, and said very quietly, "Delete it." "Why?" I asked. My voice came out thinner than I meant it to. "Because once you start looking for things out there," he said, "you start seeing more than you want to. And sometimes whatever's looking back notices." He hesitated. "We've had people go missing along Perkinsville. Good woodsmen. Guys who knew better than to wander off. You don't want to start connecting that kind of dot. You really don't." I didn't delete it. Not right away. I watched it a dozen more times at home, late at night, pausing on that long, narrow silhouette in the dust. Each time I did, I felt sicker. Not just because of what it was, but because of where it was standing in the last clip. Right on the white chalk mark I could see I'd made weeks earlier to note a pothole I kept meaning to complain about. It had learned my habits that precisely. I don't drive Perkinsville Road anymore. I take the long way. I leave earlier, sit in more traffic, burn more gas, and thank every taillight and billboard I pass. The forest is still there, parallel to the highway, dark and watchful. But that specific stretch of dirt and juniper and sky, I give it a wide berth. Sometimes, though, habits die hard. I'll glance at the dash at 8 a.m., wherever I am, and feel that old weight in my chest, that sense that something out there is turning its head, expecting to see my truck crawling along its usual route, waiting, counting. I know how it sounds. A story from an old contractor who spent too many years alone on back roads. But let me say it to you like this, person to person. If you ever start seeing the same shape on the edge of your vision along the same stretch of forest road at the same time each day, don't test it. Don't think you're special or tougher or less likely to vanish because you're careful. Change your route, change your schedule. Break your pattern before something else finishes learning it. Because out there in the Coconino, along lonely roads like Perkinsville, you're not just commuting. You're teaching the forest exactly when and where to find you. And once it's learned your rhythm, you might not be the one who decides when that routine ends. You know how people say the forest is alive? Most of the time they mean it in that poetic, peaceful way. Birds, wind, insects, all that. When I say the Coconino is alive, I mean something else. I mean, I watched the trees grow in the wrong direction in a single night. I watched the timberline move. And if you were sitting next to me right now, close enough to hear how my voice changes when I talk about that reserved section, you'd know I'm not being dramatic. I lost my entire career over what I saw in there, and I still don't know if I got out early or too late. I was a timber cruiser, 3rd generation. My father did it, and his father before him. We weren't loggers exactly. We were the ones who went in first, walking transects with clipboards and paint guns, counting trees, measuring diameters, estimating board feet, and marking what could go and what had to stay. By the time I got the Coconino contract, I figured I'd seen every kind of forest you could throw at a person. The ponderosa out there felt like home, tall, straight, that warm vanilla smell off the bark when the sun hits right. Almost half that forest is considered timberland, and a small piece of that, not even 5%, is labeled reserved. On a map, it's just a shaded block with a code. On the ground, it's behind a locked gate with no explanation. At first, the reserved label didn't mean anything to me. Agencies set aside areas all the time. Habitat protection, research plots, cultural sites. My job was to work the bordering sections, not to ask questions. They gave me maps with my grids, and I started walking. First week was typical. Long days, resin on my pants, pine needles in my socks, radio crackling every couple of hours for check-ins. I'd mark my plots, hammer in a stake, spray my paint marks. The Coconino felt like any other big, healthy forest. Maybe a little too quiet at times, but every forest has its moods. It was the boundaries that started to bother me. The line between regular timberland and the reserved block was marked with old metal signs and blaze marks on the trees. Thin scars, decades old. I've followed boundary blazes my whole working life, and those are usually straightforward. Tree, gap, all in a line. These weren't. They bent slightly inward, like someone drawing a circle that didn't quite trust a straight edge. I'd stand there sometimes, hand on a marked trunk, and realize the line didn't just skirt the dense growth. It avoided specific trees, certain clumps. Like the boundary was drawn around something, not through it. I didn't step across at first. Rules are rules, and there's professional pride in following them. But as the days went on, my plots got stranger. I'd measure a cluster of pines at 9 inches diameter, mark them in the book, flag a couple. Next day, on the way to another plot, I'd pass the same cluster, same distinctive forked trunk, same rock outcrop at the base, and the tape would read 11 inches. That kind of growth doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a decade. I checked and rechecked my notes, my tape, even my own memory. It shouldn't have been possible. Trees I marked keep one afternoon would have my exact mark, faded and sun-bleached, like it had been there 10 years, not 10 hours later. Once, I put a fresh slash of blue on a trunk, turned away to measure the next tree, then looked back, and the paint was already cracked and flaking like it had dried and aged for seasons. I touched it with my thumb and felt dust, not tackiness. That was the first time I radioed in and asked if anyone else had ever noticed anomalies in section R47. The line went quiet for a second. Then my supervisor said too casually, "Stay out of the reserve. Just work your grid." You know that feeling when someone answers the question you didn't ask? That's what that moment felt like. I hadn't mentioned the word reserve. I hadn't said where I was. But he did. After that, every time I got within sight of the locked gate that guarded the access road into that shaded block on my map, I felt watched. Not in the usual there might be a bear way, in that prickling, under-the-skin way, as if the whole tree line was holding its breath, waiting to see if I'd step over. I held out for another week. Then the GPS started lying to me. I'd log coordinates at a plot, say 35.0 something north, 111.0 something west. Write them down, move on. The next morning, when I checked, those same coordinates would now fall 100, 200 yards deeper into the reserved area. My points were migrating on the screen, like someone had clicked and dragged them across the map overnight. I updated firmware, swapped units, changed batteries. Same result. Every plot I'd worked near that boundary slowly crept inward, as if the forest were pulling my survey into its off-limits heart. The day I broke the rule, It didn't feel like a big decision. It felt like stepping over a painted line in a parking lot. The gate was just a metal formality. The actual forest didn't change when I crossed. Same red-brown soil, same carpets of needles, same smell. The only difference was the silence. Behind the gate, the sound dropped. No distant engine hum, no far-off voices from other crews, just my boots, my breath, and the faint hiss of wind high in the crowns. Even the radio picked up a slight static, like I'd stepped into a weak signal pocket. I told myself I was just going in far enough to grab one plot, one set of measurements, professional curiosity, to see if the trees were really that different. I marked a center point with my stake, tied my ribbon, and started the familiar circle: measure, note, mark. The trees inside the reserve were wrong, but not in any way I could take a picture of. Their bark patterns repeated. I'd walk 50 feet and see the same twist, the same scar notch in a trunk, like a copy-paste error in the landscape. A limb would bend southeast at just the same angle as 3 others I'd already noted. Not similar, identical. I finished a tally, wiped sweat from my forehead, and went to write the plot center coordinates. When I glanced at the GPS, my stomach flipped. The device said I was standing in a blank space. No roads, no grid, no shading. Just an unmarked gap where the map showed nothing at all. I stepped back towards where I knew the gate had to be. The dot crawled across the screen, but no amount of turning made the little arrow line up with a road. The forest around me felt closer. I realized then that every tree I could see was about the same size. No saplings, no deadfall, no underbrush choking out the ground. Just those endless, identical trunks, spaced almost evenly, as if someone had planted them with a ruler. My breath sounded too loud. I tried the radio. Static. I tried again, moving a few feet left. A burst of half words came through. Don't. Inside that. Then nothing but a rising, low hum. Not mechanical, not quite natural. I told myself to calm down, to use the oldest method. Pick a direction and walk straight until you hit something recognizable. So I picked the slope. I knew the land dipped toward a drainage not far from where I'd come in. If I headed downhill long enough, I'd either find the ravine or hit the boundary again. Easy. Except the slope didn't stay consistent. One moment, I'd be walking with a gentle descent. The next, it felt flat again, although my legs said I'd been going downhill for 10 minutes. I started marking trunks with fresh, bright orange slashes as I passed. A breadcrumb trail in paint. I walked another 15-20 minutes until sweat soaked my shirt and my calves burned. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar blaze. Same height, same messy angle, same drip mark where I'd been sloppy with the spray. I'd walked in a circle. No, not just a circle. I'd walked away from my mark and somehow returned from the other side. The paint was still wet. I touched it with my thumb and came away bright orange. The forest hadn't just bent my path, it had folded it. That was the moment the fear really set in. Not the jump scare kind, but the slow, crushing realization that the forest inside that reserved block didn't follow the same rules as the one outside. Space felt elastic. Distances lied. My tools, metal, plastic, satellites, meant nothing in there. And the trees, all those neat, identical trunks felt less like individuals and more like growths on a single, larger thing. Something cracked in the distance. A limb. A trunk. It sounded too deliberate, like a knuckle popping. Then another closer. The hum on the radio synced up with it. A weird little vibration that aligned with the tightening muscles in my back. I realized then that the breeze had stopped altogether. The air was still, but the trunks around me creaked anyway, as if stressed by a wind only they could feel. I don't remember deciding to run. One second I was frozen, listening. The next I was bolting between the trees, not caring about direction anymore, just needing motion, any direction that wasn't here. The forest blurred. My breath ripped in and out, twigs snagged my pants. The GPS bounced against my chest like a useless weight. At some point, I lost the stake, my notebook, half my flags. All I had was the sound of my own ragged panic and that occasional loud crack, always just behind me, as if something massive was rolling its weight from root to root. Then, road. Just like that. I burst out of the tree line, stumbled, and nearly went down on my knees on gravel. The locked gate stood 10 yards to my right, paint chipped, chain rusted, exactly as I'd left it. Beyond it, the trees looked normal again, variety in their spacing, deadfall tangled at their bases, underbrush reclaiming light. I spun around. Where I'd just come from, there was no sign of the uniform grove. Just a dense slope of typical forest, nothing that looked remotely like the neat, repeating pattern I'd been trapped in. My radio crackled to life, clear as day. "You copy? Check-in overdue." I pressed the transmit button with shaking fingers, spat out something about getting turned around, about bad reception. I didn't mention the reserve. I didn't mention stepping past the gate. I sure as hell didn't mention feeling like I'd been walking inside a single organism that had grown around me and then decided, for whatever reason, to let me go. I quit 3 weeks later, filed it as personal reasons. My family thought I'd lost my mind. Who walks away from a solid contract at my age? I didn't tell them the real reason. I didn't tell them that in my last days on the job, I went back through some of the old survey archives and found hand-drawn maps from the 1930s. The reserved block was already marked back then. Next to the boundary lines, in neat, faded pencil, someone had written 2 words: maintain limit, not no cutting, not protected habitat, just that, maintain limit. Like a warning to future crews not to let the line slip, not to let the forest keep expanding. Here's what keeps me up nights. And maybe it will sit with you now, too, like we're sharing this table. Forests grow. It's what they do. But that place in the Coconino doesn't just grow up or out. It grows in. It learns the shape of the land it's given and fills it completely, presses against its boundaries until someone comes along and paints a new line. If you ever see a section on a map labeled as reserved with no clear reason, and when you get there, the trees all look a little too similar, a little too evenly spaced, don't cross the line. Don't test the boundary. Because on the other side, the forest isn't just trees. It's one unbroken body. And if it closes around you, there's no guarantee it'll decide to spit you back out. You know how people say trees are the oldest witnesses on Earth? Most folks mean it metaphorically. They're talking about age and memory in a poetic way. I don't mean it that way. When I say the trees up on the high ridges of Coconino remember things, I mean I've seen their memories drilled out in front of me, ring by ring, and I've watched those memories line up perfectly with the years people went missing in that forest. If we were sitting together right now and I laid that core sample on the table between us, I don't think you'd ever sleep the same way again. I'm a botanist, the boring kind in most people's eyes. My specialty is dendrochronology, tree ring dating. I'm the one who spends hours in labs, bent over microscopes, measuring tiny bands of wood to reconstruct droughts, fires, and climate shifts hundreds of years back. You'd be surprised how much a tree can tell you. What summers were dry, when a fire burned nearby, when insects swarmed. For decades, that's all I cared about. Patterns, not ghosts. Data, not superstition. Then I started working with the bristlecone pines in Coconino's high country. They're not as famous as the ancient ones in California or Nevada, but there are pockets of bristlecones up above 11,000 feet near the high alpine zones. Stunted, twisted elders clinging to cliffs and ridgelines, their bark flowing like melted wax, their needles dark and tough. Some of those trees were already old when the first Europeans ever set foot in Arizona. That kind of age humbles you. It also means they've watched a lot more than fires and droughts. My project started simple enough. Correlate growth patterns in those bristle cones with known climate events. And, as a side project, with documented wildfires in the Coconino over the last century. I had access to historical records, dates of big burns, years of severe drought, that kind of thing. I'd hike up, collect core samples with an increment borer, bring them back down, mount them, sand them, and read their stories under the scope. Long days, thin air, cold fingers, but satisfying work. The first odd thing I noticed, I wrote off as coincidence. It was a spike, a sudden burst of whiter rings in one tree's growth around 1954. The years around it were typical for a high-elevation bristlecone, thin, slow, steady. But that one year, the ring was fat, like the tree had suddenly feasted. There hadn't been extra rain that year according to the records. No big fire, no obvious environmental reason. It bothered me, but not enough to derail my work. Then I saw it again. Different tree, different slope, same pattern. A thin sequence of rings, then a sudden wide one, then back to thin. This time the date lined up with 1978. Again, no climate anomaly I could find. I started making a separate list, off to the side of my official notes, years with unexplained growth spikes. At first, it was just those two. Then 3, 4, 5 trees started adding themselves to that list. The same handful of years kept reappearing. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I cross-referenced those years with something else, unresolved missing persons and fatal incidents in and around Coconino's high elevations. It wasn't hard to find. Hikers, climbers, campers who'd gone missing in the surrounding wilderness, some whose bodies were recovered, some who were never found. When I laid my list of unexplained growth spikes next to the list of unexplained disappearances in those specific ridges, my scalp tingled. Not every disappearance matched, but enough did. Too many. A climber vanished in a sudden storm in 1954 on a ridge less than 2 kilometers from one of my sampled trees. A pair of backpackers found dead under unclear circumstances in 1978. Hypothermia blamed, though gear and conditions didn't fully support it. A solo hiker who stepped off the trail to get a better view and never came back. Each time one of those cases popped up, one or more of the bristlecones nearby had a year of sudden, inexplicable, exuberant growth. I told myself it was still coincidence. Correlation doesn't equal causation. That's a mantra you repeat until it's a reflex. But I couldn't shake it. I started sampling more aggressively, expanding my radius, targeting the oldest trees with the most complete timelines. Up on one exposed ridge, I cored a massive, gnarled bristlecone that my gut told me was at least 1,000 years old. The borer creaked as I turned it, the wood fighting me like I was intruding on something private. When I finally pulled the core out, it was perfect. Long, straight, dense with centuries. Back in the lab, I mounted and sanded it like always. Under the microscope, the rings resolved into crisp lines. Tight, tight, tight. Ordinary hardship, season after season. Then here and there, a ring that burst wide, almost gluttonous. I started counting backward from the outermost ring, matching them with dates. My pencil ticked off 2019, 2018, 2017, on and on, the numbers scrolling back in time until I hit the wide rings. 2003, 1978, 1954, 1911, 1843, 17, 20. Years that meant nothing in climate records, but it started to mean something else in my private list of the forest's tragedies. I remember sitting there alone in that lab, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, realizing something I'd never let myself entertain before. These trees weren't just witnesses. They were responding to something that had nothing to do with rain or temperature. Something nutritional. It took me a while to admit what I was thinking, even to myself. Bristlecones are masters of survival. They grow slowly, conserve energy, clutch every scrap of nutrient in that thin alpine soil. For a ring to suddenly widen like that, something had to change. Something had to feed them. I started pulling old academic studies, fringe stuff, half-dismissed papers about possible links between tree growth and animal mass decomposition nearby, roots finding rich pockets of nitrogen and phosphorus and exploding into them. I found one or two obscure studies hinting at microscale effects. Nothing on the scale I was seeing. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those rings in my head, wide bands of growth layered over the years. People had vanished or died on those ridges. I went back up the mountain, alone, to one particular tree that had shown the clearest pattern. If I'd had any sense, I would have brought someone with me. But obsession makes you stupid. The tree was right where I'd left it, squat, twisted, perched on the edge of a drop, its roots clutching at rock. My core hole in its side had oozed a thin tear of resin that had hardened in a glossy bead. I walked around it, studying the ground. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just rocks, sparse grass, lichen. Then, about 10 feet downslope, I noticed a shallow depression where the soil was darker, richer than the pale grit around it. Plants grew a little denser there, their green more vibrant. Moss clung to the stones in a thick mat. I knelt, dug my gloved fingers into the dirt. It was softer, damper than it had any right to be up there. The smell that rose up was not just earth. There was a sweetness to it, a sour, sick undertone that I'd smelled before in decomposition sites, back when I'd done field work on post-fire revegetation and stumbled across dead animals. I sat back hard, heart thudding. There are official records, and then there are things everyone in an area kind of knows. The story about the solo hiker who disappeared near that ridge was one of those. People said they'd found a scrap of fabric years later, a boot, but never a body. Looking at that lush patch of soil, the way the bristlecone's roots angled toward it, thicker and more numerous on that side, I realized why. I stood up fast, hands shaking, and almost dropped my field notebook. On some irrational impulse, I walked the circle around the tree again, eyes scanning for more anomalies. That's when I saw the embedded fragments. Not big, nothing that would stop a casual hiker in their tracks. Just tiny, irregular shapes in the weathered, exposed roots and nearby rocks. A curved white sliver here, a knob there. Under a layer of lichen on one root, a rounded protrusion the size of a coin, too smooth and too pale to be ordinary stone. I scraped gently with my knife. A small flake crumbled away, revealing a dense, porous structure beneath. Bone. It hit me like a wave then. The wide growth rings, the dates, the lush soil, the embedded fragments. These trees weren't just incidentally growing near places where people died. Over centuries, their roots had slowly, patiently infiltrated the spaces where bodies lay, drawing sustenance molecule by molecule, year after year, translating flesh into wood and bark and needles. The forest had been quietly integrating us into its own timeline, recording our endings as years of bounty. I stumbled back, almost dizzy. I wanted to scream or laugh or both. It made perfect ecological sense in the most horrifying way possible. Nothing in nature goes to waste. But there was something else bothering me. An itch in the back of my brain I couldn't scratch until I got back to the lab and laid all my data out at once. When I did, I saw it. The intervals between the unexplained growth spikes had been shrinking. In the 1700s, they came centuries apart, then decades, then, over the last 50 years, sometimes only a few years apart. The forest was feeding more often. Or, more precisely, the trees were being offered more to feed on, more visitors, more recreation, more chances for things to go wrong. You might think the rational response would be to publish, to scream this discovery to the scientific community. But what was I going to say? Hey, these 1,000-year-old trees probably have human DNA in their growth rings. And by the way, they're getting more of it lately. Even if anyone believed me, what would they do? Cut them down, dig up every suspicious patch of soil on every ridge, rope off half the high country. Instead, I did something I'm not proud of. I told part of the truth. I published a paper about alpine bristlecones in Coconino showing unexpected growth patterns potentially linked to localized nutrient influx. I flagged the need for increased safety awareness in high-elevation recreation areas due to correlation with historical incident records. Clinical, careful, bloodless. I left out the bone, but I kept my maps, and I stopped going up there alone. Now, when someone tells me they're going backpacking along the high ridges, staying near those ancient stands because they feel safe around such old trees, I feel that same cold slide down my spine that I feel when I think about that core sample. I always ask where exactly they're going. If they tell me a spot I've marked in red in my private notebooks, I find some reason to suggest a different route. Snow conditions, closed trails, anything. Because here's the part I can't stop thinking about, and I want you to really feel this, like I'm leaning in close to make sure you hear me clearly. Those trees will outlive all of us. Long after our bones are gone and our names are forgotten, their trunks will still be standing, and their rings will still be there, narrow, narrow, wide, keeping an unbroken record. If you vanish up there, if you slip and fall where no one sees, if the search teams give up, the forest will not. It will take you slowly. It will draw you into itself. And centuries from now, some other scientist might slide a razor blade through a core sample and notice that in one particular year, the tree grew a little fatter, a little stronger, for no climatic reason at all. In their notes, they'll probably write something like unexplained growth anomaly. They won't know your name, but the tree will. You ever driven a road you know so well you could trace every curve with your eyes closed, and then one night realize the road knows you back? Not just the turns and potholes and washboard stretches, but your habits, your schedule, the exact minute your headlights will hit a certain bend. That's what happened to me out on Forest Road 525, just outside Sedona in the Coconino, and I'm telling you this like we're sitting in a parked truck with the engine off, because if I had someone sitting next to me that night, I don't think I'd still be here. I've been using 525 for years. Locals know it as that rough dirt road that cuts through red rock country toward the backway camp spots, past cliffs and junipers, and those strange rock formations tourists love. I used it as my shortcut to job sites, construction work, mostly. Between Sedona and some of the more remote properties tucked back off the main routes. Daylight, nighttime, it never mattered. My old pickup could handle the ruts, and I like the quiet. No traffic, just my headlights and the crunch of tires on dirt. The night I realized something was wrong, it was early fall. Clear sky, stars sharp and cold overhead, the air cooling down after a long, hot day. I'd stayed late at a job pouring concrete footers for a deck. By the time I left, it was close to 10 p.m. I remember checking the time because I texted my sister that I'd be home late. The clock in the truck read 10:07 when I turned off the main road and bumped onto 525. If you've never driven that kind of forest road at night, let me paint it for you. Your headlights cut a tunnel through the darkness, catching the dusty washboard surface and the occasional white flash of a rock. On either side, junipers and low shrubs crowd close, their twisted shapes rising and falling like a tide. Here and there, you get a glimpse of the red cliffs, black against the sky. It's beautiful in daylight. At night, it's quieter. The kind of quiet where you hear every rattle inside your vehicle and every breath you take. The first few miles were normal. I knew each bend by feel. There's a curve to the left where the ruts always yank your front tires, then a slight rise where you can see the faint glow of Sedona's lights if you look back. I remember humming along with the radio, a little tired but not exhausted. And then I saw the mile marker. It was an old wooden stake with a faded metal plate, one of those markers they put up years ago. I'd passed it hundreds of times. Mile 3. Nothing special. Only when I glanced at the odometer, it said I'd already driven nearly 6 miles since turning off the main road. I frowned, Chalked it up to memory playing tricks. Maybe I'd misremembered where that stake was. Roads blur after a while. I kept driving. The road straightened out, then curved around a stand of taller junipers. A few minutes later, another marker slid into the beam of my headlights. Same wooden stake, same crooked lean, same bullet dent on the metal plate. Mile 3. Again, the hair on my arm stood up. I checked the odometer. It had ticked another 2 miles since I'd last seen that sign. I slowed down, the truck rumbling as the tires dug into the washboard surface. Maybe someone had installed duplicate markers as a joke. Maybe I was just more tired than I thought. I glanced at the dashboard clock. 10:19. Fine. Long day. Don't overthink it. But the road ahead felt different after that. Not in any way I could point to. Same ruts, same curves, same low rise and drops. But my stomach started to twist with each bend. There's a particular tree, a big juniper, with a weird forked trunk that I always used as a mental landmark. 10 minutes later, there it was, lit up in front of me. And right next to it, mile marker 3. This time, I stopped the truck. The dust caught up with me and rolled past, glittering in the lights for a moment before settling back into the dark. The engine ticked, cooling. I put it in park, then killed the radio so all I could hear was the faint ringing in my own ears and the distant whisper of wind through the branches. I didn't get out immediately. I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, feeling suddenly like someone had leaned in close over my shoulder. The dashboard clock read 10:31. My odometer said I'd driven over 10 miles since leaving the main road, but I was still staring at a sign that insisted I was 3 miles in. I told myself I'd turn around. Simple. It's a forest road, not a maze. I'd just backtrack to the highway and take the longer paved way home. I reached for the gear shift, and that's when the headlights caught something else. 2 faint red glows reflected in the side mirror, far behind me on the road. My first thought was taillights. Another vehicle, maybe also pulled over. But they were too high, too far apart, and too still. No engine noise, no dust cloud, nothing but those 2 points of red, softly pulsing like embers in the dark. I watched them for a good 10 seconds, breath shallow, heart thudding. They didn't move. They didn't blink out. They just watched. I told myself they were a reflection from my own brake lights. That made sense, right? Light bouncing off something. I released the brake to test it. My red lights faded on the road in front, but those twin glows in the mirror stayed, unchanging. The urge to get out and look warred with the instinct screaming at me to stay exactly where I was. In the end, stubbornness won. I opened the door, the interior light spilling into the darkness, feeling suddenly exposed. The air outside was cooler than it had any right to be, with that dry, desert night chill that wraps around you like thin hands. I stepped down, boots crunching on gravel, and turned toward the back of the truck. The road behind me was empty. No car. No truck. No bike. Just the ribbon of dirt vanishing into the dark and the silhouettes of junipers hunched on either side. The twin red glows were still there, but now that I was outside, I realized they weren't lights at all. They were 2 small reflectors barely catching what was left of my headlights, nailed crookedly to an old wooden post on the side of the road I swear had never been there before. My heartbeat didn't slow. If anything, it got louder. I walked closer, the dust puffing with each step. The post was rough, splintered, half rotten at the base. The reflectors were scratched and clouded. Below them, someone had carved something into the wood. Not words, lines, short vertical cuts, 10 of them in a group, then a space, then 10 more, tallies. I let my fingers hover over them without touching. The sensation of being watched pressed in harder. The dark beyond the reach of my headlights felt thicker, like it had weight. Every instinct I had told me something was standing just beyond that line of sight, motionless, waiting patiently for me to make a mistake. I backed toward the truck slowly, refusing to turn my back on the road. Once inside, I locked the doors without thinking. An old habit from city nights suddenly useful here. An empty forest. I started the engine, the familiar vibration a small comfort, and shifted into reverse. Here's the part that's hard to make you believe. I backed up for maybe 30 seconds, straight, watching the reflectors slide out of my view and the road stretch behind me. Then I shifted into drive, turned the wheel, and began heading back the way I came. Heart pounding, but certain this was the right move. Get to the highway. Get to people. Get away. 3 minutes later, the big forked juniper loomed into view in my headlights, exactly where it had been before. And beside it, mile marker 3. The panic hit then. Not the prickly kind you get when you lose your wallet, but the deep, cold kind that starts in your spine. My hands felt numb on the wheel. The forest outside looked the same, but it also felt awake. Like the trees had leaned in a little closer when I wasn't looking. The road beneath me was no longer a route from one place to another. It was a loop. A trap. I checked the clock. 10:47. I could have sworn I'd been on that dirt road for nearly an hour. My odometer read 16 miles since leaving the highway. No matter what the number said, the world outside insisted I hadn't gone further than mile 3. I'll be honest with you. I talked to myself then, out loud, trying to anchor my thoughts. This is just a road, I said. It's dirt and rock and trees. It's not alive. It's not... I cut myself off because my headlights had caught something new. Far ahead, in the middle of the road, stood a figure. Just a silhouette at first, black against the brown-gray of the dirt. Tall. Too tall for a kid, too narrow for a normal adult. It didn't move as my truck rolled closer, didn't flinch as the light washed over it. No animal I'd ever seen stood like that, perfectly straight. Arms at its sides. Head tilted just slightly, as if examining me. I stopped well short, engine idling. The distance between us was maybe 30 yards. Not far enough. The figure was turned toward me. But I couldn't make out details. No face, no clothes, just an absence carved out of space where a person should have been. The junipers around it leaned away, slightly, like even they didn't want to brush against it. We stared at each other, or at least I stared at it, for what felt like a full minute. My mouth went dry. The air in the cab thickened. I had the insane urge to flash my high beams, like that would somehow force it to reveal itself. Instead, I did something that to this day I can't fully explain. I reached down and turned off my headlights. Darkness slammed into the truck like a physical blow. No more tunnel of visibility, no more comfort. Just black and the faint outline of the dashboard. My heart was so loud I swear I could hear it echo. In that suffocating dark, every instinct screamed that something was now much closer. I flicked the headlights back on. The road ahead was empty. No figure, no tracks, just the dirt, the forked juniper, and the mile marker. 3. I didn't think. I floored it. The truck roared, rattling over ruts, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The sensible part of my brain, the part that knew speeding on that road was a bad idea, was drowned out by raw animal terror. I just needed out. Out of the loop, out of the trap, out of whatever had been standing in my way. I don't know how long I drove like that. Minutes. Hours. Time lost meaning. The clock on the dashboard glitched, freezing at 10:52 no matter how many times I glanced at it. The odometer rolled on, though, climbing past 20 miles, then 25. Yet again and again, that same twisted juniper appeared, and that same battered 3 stared back at me as if mocking the entire idea of distance. I started to cry at some point. Quietly, ashamed but unable to stop. I spoke to the road, to the forest, to whatever intelligence was holding me there. I apologized. I begged. I promised I'd stop using the shortcut, take the long way, leave this place alone if it just let me go. My voice sounded small even to my own ears, swallowed as soon as I spoke. Finally, something changed. Up ahead, through the film of dust and my own tears, I saw a new light. Faint at first, then growing. Not headlights. A steady pale glow from the left. I took my foot off the gas and rolled to a slower pace, squinting. It was the highway. The real highway. The smooth black ribbon of it, lit by a single street lamp near the intersection. I burst out of the tree line so fast I nearly shot across without looking. Behind me, the entrance to 525 looked ordinary. Just a dark gap in the forest, gravel spilling onto asphalt like any other forest road. My dashboard clock ticked, as if nothing had happened, slipping from 10:52 to 10:53. My phone, when I checked it, disagreed. It said 1:27 a.m. I don't drive 525 at night anymore. When I have to use it in daylight for work, I keep my eyes off the mile markers. But sometimes, at the edge of my vision, I swear I catch a glimpse of that same crooked post, those two cloudy reflectors, and a fresh set of tallies carved underneath the old ones. I haven't stopped to check. I don't need to. The road might be dirt and rock and trees, like I tried to tell myself that night. But it's also something else, something that learns patterns, that waits at certain hours, that folds distance and time in on themselves like paper until you realize you're not just driving through the forest. You're driving on something that can decide when, or if, you come out. So if you ever find yourself on a lonely Coconino back road after dark, and you pass the same landmark twice, don't keep going to prove you're not lost. Turn around. Get to the nearest stretch of pavement with streetlights and other cars and human noise. Because once a road out there knows your schedule, your headlights, and the sound of your engine, it might just decide it wants a longer look. And trust me, you do not want to be on mile 3 when it does. You ever been underground so deep that the air itself feels older than you? Not just stale or damp, but ancient. Like you're breathing in time that should have stayed buried. That's what I want you to picture. Because before anything went wrong, before I realized I wasn't in a normal cave system, that's what hit me first in Coconino. The age of what I was standing inside. I was in the forest as a contracted geologist, not a thrill seeker. My job was simple on paper. Sample and log sections of exposed sediment and old lakebed deposits near the Verde Valley side of the forest, where ancient water once sat and left behind layer after layer of mud and minerals. Coconino looks dry now, all ponderosa and rock and canyon, but under the surface, there's a quiet record of lakes and rivers that disappeared long before we showed up. That's what fascinates people like me, the idea that stone remembers. Rock doesn't forget the weight of water or the presence of life. It holds it, compresses it, keeps it around as fossils and layers and colors. I trusted that. I lived by it professionally. I wish I still did. The day everything happened started like any other. The air was warm on the surface, pine-scented and deceptively calm, that kind of clear Arizona morning where the sky looks too big to ever turn on you. I parked my truck off a dirt road and hiked into a shallow ravine where I'd been told there were interesting limestone and lake deposit exposures, pale, chalky walls with visible bands you could read like a history book. I had my notebook, my rock hammer, my hand lens. This wasn't supposed to be dangerous work. The quietest jobs are the ones that blindside you. I found the formation I'd been told about, a 30-foot face of pale layered stone, crumbly lake, sediments hardened by time. If you squinted, you could see the faint ripples in the rock where water once moved, tiny preserved waves frozen mid-motion. I got close, running my hand along the surface. It felt softer than I expected, powdery, almost. A couple taps with the hammer told me it was more fragile than it looked. Not ideal, but workable. The lower layers were beautifully defined, with bands of darker material that suggested organic matter, maybe old plant material or whatever lived in that ancient lake. All I was supposed to do was take a few core samples. That was it. I marked my points, set my tools, and started boring into the wall. The sound of the portable drill echoed strangely inside that narrow ravine. Every vibration crawling up my arm, As I drilled, some of the rock crumbled away, faster than it should have, like it was hollow behind the surface. The vibration changed pitch, a little higher, a little more resonant. If you've drilled enough rock, you know what solid feels like and sounds like. This wasn't that. I pulled back, wiped the dust away, and saw something I wasn't expecting. A hairline crack extending vertically along the face, fresh, the edges too sharp to be old. I told myself it was just a weak spot. I tapped gently along it with my hammer. The sound changed again, dull solid, then suddenly, hollow, like hitting the side of a drum instead of a wall. Curiosity is what pushed me, not bravery, not recklessness, just that quiet voice that says, "What's behind this?" So I chipped away, a little at first, carefully. The rock crumbled, flaking off in dusty sheets instead of breaking clean. Beneath the first layer, the color changed from pale to a darker yellowish gray, smoother, like something had polished it. I widened the opening until I could fit both hands in, feeling around the edges. There was empty space beyond. A void. The ancient lake bed had a pocket in it. I wedged my shoulders in and peered through. My headlamp beam fell into a small chamber, no bigger than a studio apartment, carved entirely out of the stone. Except carved is the wrong word. This wasn't a cave the way you're picturing it. Natural caves have irregular surfaces, bumps and bulges and pockets. This cavity's walls were curved smoothly, almost organically. It felt less like standing in a hollowed-out rock and more like being inside a rib cage made of stone. Every surface bent and bowed inwards in long, gentle arcs. I ducked through the opening, heart racing in that excited professional way. The floor dipped downward, leveling out in the middle. The air inside was colder, somehow heavier. Not the damp chill of an underground stream, but still, oppressive cold that seemed to sink into my teeth. The beam of my headlamp swung across the walls, and I saw bands of color I couldn't immediately account for. Rust-red streaks, darker, almost black smears that didn't look like typical mineral deposits. They looked more like something had stained the stone from the inside out. I stepped fully in and turned in a slow circle, trying to map the space in my head. The roof curved down low on either side, then lifted in the center, so if you stood exactly in the middle, you had just enough room to raise your arms up before your fingers brushed rock. The shape nagged at me. It was too symmetrical for a natural collapse, too deliberate. The walls seemed to lean toward me, subtly. I kept having the sensation that if I stood still long enough, they would meet in the middle and close around me. As I walked along the inner curve, my boots scraped little fossils embedded in the floor, tiny shells, imprints of things that once swam when this place was underwater. It should have been comforting, evidence of the ordinary ancient life I knew and loved studying. It wasn't. The shell patterns seemed clustered strangely, concentrated in one section near the far wall, like things had been pushed there by a current that only flowed one way. When I bent closer, I realized those shells weren't just lying on the surface. They were set deep, like something heavy had pressed them into soft mud once, pinning them down before the whole thing turned to rock. I told myself I was overthinking it. I knelt to take a sample from one of the darker streaks. The rock crumbled under the chisel with a texture that turned my stomach. It broke apart not like stone but like old dried cartilage. My fingers tingled. The chill in the air deepened. I could hear my own breathing echoing in that cavity, but underneath it there was another sound, so faint I almost wrote it off as imagination. A low, intermittent creak, like weight shifting very slowly somewhere deeper in the stone. I don't know why I spoke out loud. Habit, maybe. Or maybe something in that space wanted sound. "This isn't natural," I said to no one, just to break the silence. My own voice came back to me warped, delayed, slightly off-pitch, like someone else had repeated my words a fraction of a second later. My skin crawled. I turned toward the entrance, suddenly desperate to see daylight again, but from where I stood in the center, The gap I'd broken looked impossibly small. For a second, it felt like the chamber had grown, pushing me farther from the opening. I took a step and felt an odd, spongy give under my boot. When I moved the light down, my stomach dropped. The floor wasn't flat like I thought. It was subtly ridged, lined with long, parallel rises. I crouched, gag reflex fighting me, and ran my fingers over them. Each ridge was about the width of a human rib. I told myself it was coincidence. Rock does weird things. Erosion and deposition can mimic patterns. But then my hand traced along one ridge and fell into a regular notch. Then another, evenly spaced, like vertebrae running down a spine. The entire chamber, every curve and swell of stone, suddenly snapped into a horrible new shape in my mind. This wasn't just a cavity in a lake bed. I was standing inside the fossilized remainder of something's chest. The air felt thinner, heavier, all at once. I stood too fast, head swimming. The sound I'd heard earlier, the low creak, came again, a fraction louder, and this time I felt it under my boots. The stone flexed, just barely, like something impossibly massive had shifted a fraction of an inch miles below. My rational brain screamed that it was impossible. Fossils don't move. Rock doesn't breathe. I backed toward the opening, eyes locked on those rib-like ridges, heart pounding louder than my footsteps. The headlamp flickered once, twice. On the second flicker, in the split second of darkness, I felt every instinct in my body scream that the chamber had gotten smaller, the walls closer. When the light came back, nothing had visibly changed, but I could no longer hear my own breath echo. The sound wasn't coming back to me at all. It was being swallowed. "Get out," I muttered to myself. "Get out now." My boot hit something that wasn't stone. I looked down and saw a line of small pale shapes jammed along one of the ridges. At first I thought they were more shells. Then I saw the unmistakable curve of a human molar, the root still clinging to a crumble of jawbone turned mineral. Beside it were other fragments, finger bones smoothed by time, vertebrae fused partly into the rock. Not recent, nothing fresh, but not from the same era as the lake creatures either. They were mixed in, caught in the stone's memory like afterimages. The chamber creaked again, louder. Dust drifted from the ceiling in a lazy spiral, but there was no breeze. The cold deepened to the point my teeth ached. Each breath felt thicker, like inhaling underwater. I moved faster, scraping my shoulder on the wall as I squeezed toward the exit. Behind me, the echoes of my movement didn't sound right. It was like something was copying the rhythm of my steps a beat late. As I reached the gap, my headlamp caught one more detail that haunts me more than the bones. Along the inner surface of what I'd now accepted was a kind of fossilized rib. There were grooves, thin, deep lines running lengthwise, parallel, overlapping in frantic, chaotic patterns. Claw marks, scratch marks. Not clean, purposeful cuts, but the kind of furrows you see when something trapped tries very, very hard to get out. I didn't stop to analyze them. I shoved myself through the opening, scraping skin off both arms, choking on the sudden rush of warmer surface air. The instant my boots hit the ravine floor outside, the creaking stopped. The pressure vanished. The world snapped back into ordinary proportions, birdsong faintly audible through the trees, distant wind stirring branches. Behind me, the gap in the rock face looked small, unimportant, like any other minor fracture in an old deposit. I stood there, shaking, dust in my hair, heart hammering for reasons no report could ever safely describe. My hand went automatically to my notebook. What was I supposed to write? Discovered anomalous cavity resembling what? Thoracic fossil of unknown scale. No one would believe it. And if they did, what then? You can't excavate something like that. You shouldn't. I packed up in a hurry, leaving one of my tools behind without realizing until I got back to the truck. I didn't go back for it. In my official report, I mentioned unstable sediment, potential collapse risk, recommended the area be flagged as hazardous and left undisturbed. That was all. No mention of bone-like ridges, of human fragments embedded in ancient stone, of the feeling that the entire formation had twitched around me like a sleeping animal disturbed by a fly. That night, in my motel room, I lay awake with a pressure on my chest that had nothing to do with anxiety and everything to do with memory. The sensation of being inside something's ribs wouldn't leave. When I closed my eyes, I could feel the curve of those walls, the way they angled inward, designed not to shelter but to hold. Sometimes, if I let my mind drift, I swear I can feel that creak again, faint but real, like something vast turning over miles beneath the forest, annoyed that a tiny, insignificant thing found its way between its bones. You can believe this was some kind of hallucination, a geologist's imagination running wild in a lonely ravine. You can tell yourself, rock can't move, fossils don't breathe, and whatever bones I saw were old, harmless, natural. That's what I try to tell myself, too. But if you ever find yourself out near those old lakebed deposits in Coconino, and you feel the urge to tap on the walls to see if anything sounds hollow, do yourself a favor. Walk away. Some things the earth buried, it didn't mean for us to find. And some things it buried are only sleeping,